So now that we're back, this is part two. Let's get into the film. That was a little bit of backstory, and I will link my part one here, or in the description box at the end. Nonetheless, this is all linked. So now let's revisit the 1992 film Candyman. We had now that we have some backstory, and it was innovative for its time. Up until that point, we had only been introduced to Hellraiser or Freddy Krueger, Nightmare on Elm Street, Jason, Friday the 13th, Halloween, Michael Myers. These were the boogeymen. And even with Psycho, right? We still had a white male lead. So all these notorious boogeymen were all white. And it wasn't to say that now that they wanted to pin, you know, the negativity of a boogeyman to a black man, but in a fictional world, why couldn't that be? Why couldn't we have a black villain? And be respectable, but why can't, just like why we haven't seen a Latino villain necessarily? Maybe in the comic book world, but not necessarily on screen, especially at that time in the early 90s. And yet there was still a lot of the political climate was still just as violent as we see today, right? We had the Rodney King, we had the riots case, and always police brutality with people of color, against people of color. And so I think they made a conscious effort of, that's why in particular this film, the 1992 version, takes place. So they move it from Liverpool, from its original story, to Cabrini-Greene, a public housing in Chicago. And not for nothing, there are hints of it in 1992, which were smart in pointing out that there were oppressive acts and social injustice. Our main character, she notices that in this pursuit of trying to find out more about Candyman, she realizes that the Cabrini-Greene public housing mimics her loft building. The property owners are the same, but they've left this area disheveled and with zero funding. And so it's infested, it's crime infested and drug infested, and there isn't a lot of love and care, and much less funds, and people are just left to their devices. And children, and especially, well, a number of victims go missing. And there's the hidden context of, like, how is it that always it plays, even in media and in real life, that people of color can go missing and not of a lot of interest or an outcry to find these particular individuals, because solely based that they're people of color. Now, if they had been white people, there would have been much more of an interest to go and find, or at least crack down on what is happening in this particular part of town in Chicago. And then the assumption is always laid thick, especially when it comes to the media, that, well, what could have they done for them to have gone missing? And so the connotation is always attached there that they must have been, criminals themselves, druggies themselves, and they're using some illusion leading to some fantasy of a boogeyman, naming him Candyman. And they're just fighting amongst themselves, to kind of deal, and they've put themselves in this idealized fantasy world of some murderer, to kind of cope and bear with poverty. And she in digging, our Helen character in the 1992 version, she goes digging and trying to realize, she comes to the conclusion is like, there's a major double standard here, because had this been a all white community, there would have been much more of an interest there, and there would have been an initiative to put funding to get, cops really on the tail of whomever was doing it. Now we're kind of given like, some kind of fake Candyman in the 1982 version, where we are led to believe that some notorious drug lord that was, had his domain over the Cabrini-Greene projects, but that wasn't the case. It was just genuinely there was a Candyman. Now, I want to say though, the film was good, and even though I believe it was reviewed by the NAACP reviewed the film, and they kind of gave it it's okay, its stamp of okay, this can run because it's fiction and it's gory and it's a horror film, and why not? But in its sense, it still fell into the old recipe, the old okey doke of the white hero, and so at the end, she essentially is like the hero because she makes it known that Candyman was real and that she did everything in her power to save Anthony, which is now Anthony, the adult Anthony that we see in the 2021 version. Now, I want to say that this film in particular is a direct link to the Candyman original 1992 film. It's a direct sequel, because the connection that Anthony, the baby Anthony that we see in 1992, is the adult we see in this film. And we see Vanessa Williams playing her recurring character from the 1982 version. I believe her name is Anne-Marie McCoy. That was her character name. And it's not the Vanessa Williams that we all know. That's a singer. There was an actress at the time. And I believe she went by another, like I think she added another name to kind of separate her from Vanessa Williams. But nonetheless, and kudos to you, girl. You look gorgeous. I mean, you have not aged since 1992. You look nearly the same. So she reprises her role, and she's playing Anthony's mom. But in the mix of the film, we realize that Anthony doesn't know much about himself other than the fact that he was under the impression that he was raised in another part of town of Chicago, not realizing that he is that Anthony. Until like he's stung, he goes to Cabrini-Greene, who now the area is desolate because of gentrification. That's the other added layer that they've added onto the story, gentrification. How they've run down this particular space in this community with the lack of funds, the lack of education, and then once it's crime ridden and people are dying off, they want to clean it. But they don't want to clean it for the community that's there. They want to clean it for the newbies, the midtowners that no, I'm sorry, the Midwesterners who want to move to the East Coast. And it's happening nationwide, but mostly in these East Coast, states, or, the extremities of the map, because they're not dealing with the racist nonsense that most congressmen, we're currently seeing. Hello, Texas. So because of BS like that, and cutting funding and oppressing people from rights, voting rights, reproduction rights, people move to these extremities. But they need to find these spaces clean and nice, and so there goes pushing out people, longtime residents that have been there, who have struggled, have been through the neighborhood, through the ups and downs, and now here comes, the white savior, and now we have to push out all these people who can't afford the rent, and so they need to do a whole revamp of the community. Now in this version, we have a totally different Candyman. It's not the original 1992 version, but I want to say that if you want to do a comparison, that would be the Queen Bee, and then it merged and what's the word I'm looking for? Evolved into a number of other bees, and so and essentially becomes the hive. So what you see in this 2021 version with Nia DaCosta and Jordan Peele is we see another Candyman. Now, the way that we are introduced to that urban legend, and it wasn't urban, not for this particular character. So Coleman Domingo is the one that plays William Burke. And William Burke is a Cabrini-Greene resident who tells Anthony all he needs to know about how the neighborhood, the legend of Candyman, and the dangers of it. Now, Coleman, we then discover, is the storyteller because he's lived long enough in the neighborhood, and he was actually introduced to that Candyman. So Michael Hargrove as Sherman Fields. Sherman is our Candyman for this particular version. Michael Hargrove plays Sherman Fields, a one-armed man who was tortured and killed by the police after being falsely accused of planting razor blades in candy. And he has become the new subject of the Candyman legend. So again, he was falsely accused, and he meets an incredibly brutal demise because it's just assumed he's the one giving out candy without no actual proof. And then once they savagely beat him to death is when they realize the kids were still getting hurt, and they were still collecting free candy and were finding razor blades long after they had killed poor Sherman. But Sherman at this point now becomes a part of the legend because in this part of town, people forget of the original Candyman. The original Candyman, who was born in the 1800s as the son of a slave, grew up to become a well-known artist who was highly sought after to paint portraits of wealthy whites. However, after he fell in love with and fathered a child with the daughter of one of such family, her father sent the lynch mob after him. Once captured, they cut off his right hand and smeared him with the honeycomb stolen from a neighboring area, attracting bees, and stung him to death. His corpse burned and his ashes scattered across the land of which Cabrini-Greene was eventually built. So see, that's why it became what it was. It started with already killing an innocent man just based on the fact that he fell in love with this white woman, a well-to-do white woman, and her father could not stomach her being in some interracial relationship with a former slave or whatever the case may be. So he killed him, tortured him countless times, and then butchered his hand, and then allowed the bees to just do him over. So, and again, like, it's connected to what we're constantly seeing, how like the black man is always attached to the connotation of there must be a reason why. It wasn't that he was a complete victim, but then the white counterpart is never even questioned, So that in itself is layered, and that's what we see in both the 1992 version and the 2021 version. I also want to make it a point that Nia DaCosta, as young and brilliant as she is, I love her mind. And we really need to see more women in this, especially women of color in these positions. She broke ground. She was able to kick ass for this summer with the box office numbers, and is the first black female director to ever get that. It was able to attain that brass ring, that incredible accomplishment. So kudos to her. I can't wait to see more of her work. And she was very smart in how she went about doing justice to this story, and in her sense of storytelling, because when we are reminded of Candyman's unfortunate demise, throughout the whole entire film, she incorporates black artists. So they're actual visual artists, painters, puppeteers, all realms, all types of art, and covering every aspect, every color in the rainbow, basically. She incorporates in the storytelling, and especially these very incredibly violent scenes, when it came to hurting black bodies, she was conscious in not showing that graphic visual that we've seen millions of times in these films, right? You know, we've always seen the people of a person of color die first in every slasher movie. So she did not want to indulge in that in her storytelling. So she used artists and imagery, and I believe that a number of critics have already compared her way of storytelling to already known well-to-do artists like Kara Walker. Kara Walker, and I'm reading, this is a quote, DaCosta's short resembles the silhouette work of artist and filmmaker Kara Walker, who often explores issues of race, gender, and violence in her work. Most of her work, and I've been thankful and grateful to have seen her work in person. Most of it is very jarring, but brutal and brutally honest. You don't know how to feel when you're seeing a Kara Walker piece, because it looks jovial, but when you like really sit and think about what you're actually watching or interpreting, it has these layers of trauma, you know, that you can't seem to process. So in the same sense, that's what you're seeing. You see these images of, again, real life crime stories, American crime stories of the United States, and the atrocities that we've seen with a number of young black innocent men and children being put to death. But showing that is just, the visual of it is too traumatizing, too triggering. So you'll see it in the shadow puppets, which in a way it's like, it's a way of safeguarding the audience, but at the same time still telling of that honesty, of that brutality. And that's pretty much what we've seen. That's what we've been seeing online when we see these young men being arrested, and excessive police force. So it's hard. It's already been hard. And so I think she was conscious of that when she was directing, and in that particular driver's seat of what I'm going to project through this silver screen. So again, I really recommend it. I have to say also, it was amazing to see a full black cast and crew. Kudos to Jordan Peele, because he always picks wisely. Not for nothing, I think he's been able to cherry pick a good amount of black actors. And this is the second actor that I've seen from Black Mirror. If you are familiar with Netflix's Black Mirror, and that is an amazing show. I highly recommend that show. There's he was in Striking Vipers. I really recommend you watching that. We all know the main lead from Get Out, which was also, he was also part of the Black Mirror series. So if you haven't watched it, watch it please. Incredible, exceptional acting. Now I also want to make note that I don't know if this was a decision on Jordan's side of storytelling, but there are nods to the classic horrors. If you've seen Poltergeist, if you've seen any of the Poltergeist, especially like I believe it's the third one, where everything is mirrored back, that's what you see. And if anything, if you see any of the horror slashing, you see it through the interpretation of the mirror, which we didn't see. We've never really seen that kind of way of storytelling when it comes to a slasher movie. You see the crime being committed or the horror being committed through the mirror. The one scene in particular, when it was